awesome.
Awesome.
That was awesome.
You guys are awesome.
No,
You're awesome.
no.
You are awesome.
Sir, you are awesome. Seriously.
Awesome. Awesome. Awesome.
Everything is awesome.
Welcome to this week's edition of Everything is Awesome. I am your host, Kev, and this is the show where we sit down and talk to awesome people about awesome things. This week's show is a first for Everything is Awesome history. Normally, when you hear co-hosts on this show, it's Everything is Awesome Late Night, the live edition of this show when we go to a bar or a comic book store or somewhere to do this show. But I had a special request from my co-host to sit in on this interview. Please welcome my co-host, Mike DeAngelo.
Hey.
And I'm going to cut him off right there. Normally he says more, and I normally give him better props, but this is my time to shine, Mike. This week's guest is someone who is a bit of an inspiration, especially to Mike, but is someone who we've actually sat down, and I think it was a very failed attempt with That's Entertainment to do an interview probably about 4 years ago. But like when this project appeared on Kickstarter, it drew me in big time because it was like it just called back to that classic era of video games, the classic 8-bit kind of art that I still go for. Like I'd rather play those games. In fact, I download those on the Virtual Console or good old games or whatever, and they're the games I still like to play. It's what happens when you're in 30s and you don't have time for real video games. But so I'm really excited to bring on one half of the Brotherwise from Brotherwise Games, the creator of Boss Monster. Please welcome to the show, Chris. Did not verify your last name.
O'Neill of the Brothers.
That was very professional of you.
Chris, what you're going to realize, so it's actually really adorable because, that's right, I said adorable, Mike. I don't do any prep for these interviews anymore. Like back when, I don't know if you remember trying to do an interview with me like years ago with That's Entertainment, and it I think just was an epic fail, and we ended up doing a written interview instead of a podcast.
Yeah, I do remember that actually. Yeah, but we had a good written interview.
Yeah, it ended up being good going that route. It was back when I worked in a place where I could not do the show anywhere but like either my lunch hour or like right after work on my way home. So it was such a ghetto setup. But now that I have more, I guess, freedom or whatnot, I don't do any preparation now. Like back then, I used to prepare with questions and whatnot. And Mike sent me a text today saying, "Yeah, I'm going to bring a copy of the questions that I have for the interview today, so you just have a copy of them." I was like, "All right, cool." And he got here, handed them to me. I'm like, I read it over. I was like, "I'm not going to look at this at all today."
He seriously just tossed them aside.
Nice.
So I feel this show, Everything is Awesome, is more, I like the idea of it being a free-flowing conversation. So you'll get a mix of, Mike has like the hard-hitting questions, whereas as I am just going to want to talk about whatever comes to my mind and whatever you spit out and whatnot.
Awesome.
It looks like you have to say something, Mike.
I have nothing to say yet. I'm waiting for my prompt.
This is going to be for you, Chris, and for the listeners. Is going to probably be an awkward transition as Mike learns how to do an interview.
I don't know how to speak.
Yeah. So let's start with the beginning, the origin point for you, Chris, with your love of both the 8-bit style of video games and more of a tabletop like card game or any kind of tabletop game, really. Where's that origin point?
Where's that origin point? Well, I've been a nerd and a gaming nerd, as far back as I can remember. And I have very, very fond memories of playing video games. We had a TI-99 A4 way back when. It was one of those little keyboard with a cartridge slot. You could play Hunt the Wumpus. I don't know if you guys remember those. Maybe you remember, but we were sort of playing video games at my house really early on, really before Atari launched. And we graduated from the TI up to I think a Commodore, and then eventually got the Atari. But it was really when the NES system first came out that I think the seeds of all this was born, because at that point my brother Johnny, who is the other brother in Brotherwise, he's 8 years younger than me, so he had a bit of growing up to do before he could sort of join me in this. And so it was really with the NES and Mario and Zelda that we really started sort of sharing that love of sort of classic video games, including arcade games too. And I have, many fond memories of hanging out in arcades that existed at that time. And I think that if you sort of merge that with the sort of also shared love of fantasy and sci-fi movies and gaming, all of that was sort of in the witch's cauldron that eventually bubbled up into Brotherwise.
That's I feel like now Mike and I are, for me at least, I kind of remember Atari. Like my parents had an Atari, and the one game, and I don't know the name of it. All I remember is it was like a criminal that was throwing bombs.
Oh, Kaboom!
Kaboom! That's it.
Yeah.
That's like my first memory of a video game. And then the next one is years later with, I mean, obviously like Mario and stuff like that, but like the one that like sticks out in my mind is like Bugs Bunny's Birthday Castle or whatever with on the regular Nintendo. That game my uncle and I played for hours. Like he stayed up 24 hours to beat it.
You did a full article on that. That's how much that game meant to you,
Yeah,
Kev.
that dumb game like means the world to me.
Just a lot of great games. There is a golden age of video games in between those 2 points. And a lot of people actually these days are putting those games up on the web on emulators. And so there's a number of places you can go and play Kaboom or Bomberman or, any number of games. And it actually feels very close to that old
Yeah, I enjoy going back to like now I don't use emulators too much. I usually stick to just like a virtual console or like I said earlier, good old games. And I don't think I've ventured into Steam, but I don't know if they do the classics.
You get some legacy stuff on like the Xbox every now and then, like the Atari classics and things like that.
But yes, and that's like my now, and like I'm 32. I'm 32. I'm 32 years old, and I have 2 kids. So like my gaming time is like way down compared to when it was a decade ago, and I gravitate towards those older school games. To teach my kids how to play video games because they should learn
the right way.
Yeah, and also like. It's just I go towards the like the story-esque games, like Telltale games. I love them because it's literally I can check out for 2 hours and finish an episode of that game.
You mentioned having the kids. I think that one of the neatest things about the sort of retro craze that sort of swept popular culture over the last 5 or 6 years is it really is sort of a touchstone to connect for your kids with your past. And so both Johnny and I have kids, and I find myself sitting down with my daughter and sort of explaining boss monster imagery and sort of what was this game and showing her. And it's a great way to sort of reconnect with your past while sharing.
Yeah, it's I feel the same way. Like it's my son loves, and now he'll want to go to like the newer Marios every now and then, but like he'll play the Mario Advance on the DS or Game Boy Advance or whatever. He'll play that for like hours if I let him, and it's good to see him like Mario 3. I think is the big one that we have either on Virtual Console or in the actual advanced disc, and yeah, he loves that game, and I. Like every now and then we'll go and he's got some sort of weird obsession with Assassin's Creed 4. He's 5 years old. I don't know where he got that obsession, but so every now and then he wants to go to that, but then we'll rein it back into the classic stuff. Cause again, that's just, there's something to it. The nostalgic, feeling, whatever it is, there's just something about that is very comforting for, I guess our generation of gamers.
I think Assassin's Creed is good training for any number of future vocations. There's any number of things that we able to do with that.
So much like I think most gamer nerds, your origin point dates back to that classic era, the golden age, as you so greatly put it. So when did at what point did you realize and Johnny realize that you wanted to do something yourselves? When you wanted to go from consumer to creator?
We had been gamers for a long time, but we lived in different states. And so up until 2009, I lived in Michigan. He had been in California for a while. And before that, I think he'd been in New York or Chicago somewhere. So we just weren't able to get together that often to game together. And so when I moved out to California in 2009, we were actually only about an hour away from each other at that point. And started gaming more. And I think one of the things, especially with tabletop gamers, maybe less so with video gamers, but with tabletop gamers, you tend to very quickly move from playing a game and enjoying a game to critiquing the game and thinking about how you'd make it better and doing house rules and things like that. We sort of said, hey, we're spending a lot of time talking about what would make these games better. Let's put our money where our mouth is and try to make some games. So we made a bet that the first guy who could come up with a playable prototype of a game I can't remember what it was. I think he got dinner or a beer or something. It was not much of a bet. And Johnny had been working on a game for years. And as I recall, I think maybe since college, and the game had something to do with high school popularity. It was sort of this bidding game, and it was sort of, I can't remember, it was like a translation of like Archie and the Archie comics into sort of a more strategic environment or something. But that was sort of the kernel of his game. And I came up with some memory game that I think I actually won the bet because I sort of ran off and maybe I was really focused on that beer, but I think I made a game in a weekend and came back and had a play with that. And what we quickly realized was that, it was great that I won the contest, but Johnny's idea seemed to have more legs. And it went through a number of iterations where at one point it morphed from teenage girls and competing for popularity to, I think I want to say like Dungeons and Dragons folks competing for treasure. And then there was a point where it was sort of you laid out cards to form a map as you were, moving through a dungeon. And then at some point he came in and he had this version of the game where you had a boss at the end of the game, or you had a treasure at the end of the game, and you laid out these traps and monsters in front of it. And it was sort of what would eventually become Boss Monster as it currently exists. And at that point, we played through it, and I think I said, man, this sort of reminds me of a side-scrolling dungeon from like Mario. And he said, oh, yeah, that's kind of interesting. And I said,
he just kind of blew you off.
Why don't we do this game up in like 8-bit, sort of 16-bit art, and make this really mimic one of those side-scrolling dungeons? And he hated the idea. He did not like the idea at first, and I think it was because I used the word Mario, and I think he was sort of thinking like, I don't want this to be about plumbers and turtles.
And he's the younger brother, right? So did he grow up in maybe the SNES, Nintendo 64 era, or?
Yeah, he would have, and I think, and realistically, he sort of stuck with video games after I had sort of stopped playing video games as much. So he was much more familiar with video games than I was even. And so he just didn't, I think I just used the wrong language. But as will often happen with us, I think we had some fight about it and some conflict about it. And he drove home, and he actually called me when he got home. And he said, okay, I was thinking about what you said, and I don't think you're quite onto it, but I'm gonna see what I can figure out. And I think the next week, or whenever he got a chance to work on it again, he came back, and in fact, it was Boss Monster as we sort of knew it and loved it.
Yeah, because it's got some awesome art assets that remind you of various things like Mega Man, Double Dragon. You do have a little bit of Mario 2 in there with King Croak, who looks like Wart from Mario 2. Some Castlevania kind of feels to it. I mean, it really is art from inspired by that golden age of the NES era.
It is. I mean, once we decided to dive into it, it was a deep dive. We really, the game, and I think we sort of freely admit it is much driven by the theme as it is by the mechanics. We love watching people play Boss Monster and go, hey, is that supposed to be Seamus? There's all kinds of Easter eggs hidden in there, including some which we've never seen anybody get.
Oh wow!
That's part of the fun of the game. The game is really meant to, and we made it sounded pretentious, but we made a big deal out of this when it came out. The game is really meant to sort of be a nostalgia machine. It's meant to take you back. We hope that's what it does.
Well, and it totally does that. And I remember when the Kickstarter first happened, seeing it, and I think Boss Monster was my introduction to Kickstarter as far as being a consumer, if not completely. Like, it came across my feed on something. Maybe it was like some website doing an article on it, and it I think that at the time, I was in the middle of playing a couple games from GOG that were new games but made in that Sprite 8-bit kind of style, and it spoke to me. The artwork spoke to me, and it hit me in that nostalgic feel. But once I finally got the copy in my hands and I started playing it with Mike here and some other people, it's not just it is completely that. It is a great little nostalgic trip, but it's also just a great game. It's now I'm not a big tabletop guy. I play some board games, play some card games, Magic mainly. Not anymore, but at the time that's what I was playing. So that was my first kind of indie game for tabletop, and playing it was just so unique to me, and it still is when I sit down and play it. I don't know that I've ever really played a game anything like it, and it's just fun to play on its own, not even thinking about the 8-bit art as being that nostalgic trip.
Yeah, if you still had the high school girls on there, I think it would still be successful.
Well, we'll never know. we decided early on we were not the guys to do a high school girl.
I think you could totally do Boss Monster High School Edition.
Well, it's interesting because one of the things we've tried to do with Boss Monster is make it as sort of generically gamer-friendly as we can. And one of the things we hear is that what we call the gamer girlfriends or the gamer boyfriends, the folks in the relationship who tolerate the other person's gaming but normally don't come to the table, that Boss Monster is one of the games that brings them to the table. And so, yeah, I think it's obviously we're proud of the game. We think it is a fun game to play, and it's done very well. So we think sort of people voted with their wallets on that. But it's constantly evolving. We're going to have a new mini expansion coming out at Origins, which is a big game expo in June. And we've got lots of plans to sort of keep it rolling and keep it fresh and new, so that if you do get tired of the nostalgia, there's always some new gameplay to sort of bring you back in.
Yeah, it's you guys did that almost right away. I think with Tools of a Hero kind to add a little new mechanic to the game, and I got that right away. The one thing I missed the boat on because of just having children, I think, was Boss Monster 2 was the one thing I just missed out on. But the digital, here's what I love that you guys did. You guys went digital with the original and brought it to the iOS, and I don't know if it got to Android. I had it on my iPad. But going digital with it was great because it was a way for me to because I have one of those gamer fiancés now that she doesn't really she puts up with it, but does never she'll play Phase 10. That's where she gets as far as she goes with her gaming, and maybe Super Major Baseball, whatever that was for Super Nintendo, Super Baseball League. I don't know. But so being able to play Boss Monster by yourself was great because once I have kids, I see Mike once a week if I'm lucky, and it's usually to eat lunch, not play games. So the ability to, I've always been that guy with WoW. When I got into that, I'd rather go play by myself than play with the rest of the world, which makes no sense in a multiplayer game like that. But that was such a great thing when I saw that Kickstarter start. What made you guys decide to go digital?
I mean, it was sort of it was a little bit of an inside joke at first. Like, we were going to be the ultimate meta game, the digital game about a card game about digital games. And it sort of started as a joke. But that was actually, one of the things we were very aware of as gamers with wives and kids was that, the hardest thing about tabletop is finding time to play and finding people to play. And so we wanted to find a way to make it more accessible. Like, if you wanted to play Boss Monster and you couldn't find anyone to play it, we have an avenue to do that. Now, unfortunately, the multiplayer never seemed to really work as well on the iOS version or the Android version. So there were a lot of frustrations with implementing that. But we've got some other. I don't know if you guys have heard of the virtual reality version of Boss Monster, but
What?
I have seen that on your Facebook or your website where it kind of produces the board in front of you and you're actually able to shift everything around, and it looked really cool.
It is ridiculously cool. It is, at first we were sort of, I don't know, this sounds kind of weird. I don't think it's going to work. It's not going to translate well. And frankly, it's just kind of creepy how well it works. So this company called AltSpace VR, who does social VR, they do, sort of built around getting people together in virtual reality, doing meetings, doing performances, doing presentations, but also a fair bit of gaming. So they have Cards Against Humanity. I think they call it Holograms Against Humanity. I can't remember what they do. They have a number of games now in their virtual space. So if you go to altsspacevr.com, you don't necessarily need a VR headset. You can actually go in and just use your desktop and play a game of Boss Monster on a table. And it is remarkably high fidelity to the real world experience.
I have to, because I even Mike didn't bring it to my attention. I don't know why.
Well, because you weren't going to plan on it. But the cool thing is, right now, like I can see like his hand hovering on the mouse, like he's very close to wanting to look it up right now and just like throw the interview to the side.
It is something that it's by the time we're done, this interview will be close to my bedtime, and I will stay up for hours, just getting lost in it.
Yeah, it's super cool, and to me, I sort of feel like I think the next big thing in tabletop is going to be augmented reality.
I can totally see it, like HoloLens type.
Exactly, like the Microsoft way, so that you're looking down at your game board, and unless, of course, the thing I go to is God, I forget what it's called, but that monster chess set on the Millennium Falcon, in Star Wars.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, the Holo Chess, which really had like a better name than that, but
yeah, I forget what it's called.
I remember what it was. I'm ashamed. I should know my Star Wars trivia, but how many people would you kill to have that game? I mean, that's just the coolest thing I can think of, and I can't wait for that to be. I feel like that's not that far away.
No, we're probably within like the next 10 years, I would wager.
I have to think so. I mean, there's a lot of, every time I talk to my VR guys about this, they disabuse me of the notion that this is easy. But I still feel like we have to make this happen, people. This is important.
Well, I mean, I was, up until we went to New York to go, and we went to, Mike and I went to
it was the
Madame Tussauds museum, and I had no idea what he was gung ho about taking me there. He's like, we gotta go, and I had no idea why until we got there about this Ghostbusters VR thing, and I was reading about the Void and all these other VR applications that are coming up. I'm like, it's now I'm nearing that age where things start to frighten me with technology. And I was talking to my fiance. I was like, I think that's where I draw the line. Like, I think I become scared of video games when I have to be in the video game.
When you strap on a helmet.
Yeah, and I couldn't be further from the truth with that statement, because we played the Ghostbusters VR game, and it was the coolest thing ever. And I'm right there with you. There's no way we're not within a decade of Star Wars hologram chess and stuff like that, and just this augmented reality of video gaming that I'm no longer afraid of.
Yeah, I think it's. I mean, obviously, it's going to be exciting all around, but one of the sort of the very near-reaching things we can do, like with this virtual reality gaming stuff, we've got the ability to bring in rural gamers. People are out in the middle of nowhere and don't really have anybody to play with or any game stores in the area. Disabled gamers who can't get out of their house to a game store. There's just so many neat ways now to draw the community, and that's one of the things. I mean, I think I have the coolest job in the world. Running a games company has to be one of the cooler jobs in the world, but it's also in one of the cooler businesses, and we've just been amazed at how cool the tabletop community is, and the community of gamers more broadly. And it's just a very I think video gaming can sometimes get a bad rap. There can be there's some trolls there and some tougher situations. But in tabletop in particular, the people are just really neat. And it's so cool to be at one of these conventions and have people say, hey, we love playing your game. It brought, we've had people actually propose with Boss Monster cards. I don't know if you guys knew that.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah, so we made a custom proposal card for a guy, and he proposed to his wife. So it's a really great business to be in, and I think that gaming, which is seeing a resurgence, over the past decade, is one of the ways that people are staying in touch and staying connected in what I think is a sort of more and more disconnected daily reality.
Yeah, I mean, I know, a bunch of people who have connected through, whether it be video games or tabletop. They've connected in such a way. It was a loose friend of ours, but he ended up meeting his wife through WoW, I think it was. And it is kind of crazy that that's where we're at. And obviously, just the advancement in the internet and social media and stuff like that to allow us to have this immersive multiplayer kind of lifestyle and whatnot, makes it much, much easier. But it is really, and like you said, the tabletop community being so close. I wouldn't consider myself a huge tabletop player. I've recently got into that within the last about year.
We're part of that resurgence Chris was talking about.
Yeah, exactly. And it's it's more so I'll play the card games and board games every now and then, but I really have dove into tabletop RPG. And even that community, if you're going to start breaking down tabletop into the different communities within just that, the RPG community is so great. I've never had a bad experience with having someone who is a tabletop role player on my show to talk about GMing or to talk about, just playing in general or designing, and listening to all the different podcasts that are out there now for it. They're all really cool, and everything I've heard, I have a good friend who is, really into tabletop RPG, and he goes to all the gaming conventions, and he says that it's just such a great community. There's no hate. It's all love.
It is a remarkably open community. And that's sort of one of the unspoken rules of especially RPG gaming. I think you're right. Since everyone has a right.
Hey there, super friends. It's Kev. I'm just going to interrupt this show for a minute or two so I can do some housekeeping. And first and foremost, something that I've always wanted to do and always forget about is to sit down and read some reviews that people left on iTunes. So we're going to go read the last two that we got. One is from July 28th from Bill. Everything is awesome is awesome. Great show, filled with great conversations. You really get to know Kev and his awesome guests. Subscribe and listen. This is what Oz looks like. Hashtag B1. And of course, our newest one, which was from January 5th, 2017, from Ruffy1092. Nerdy Kev is lovable and brings on great guests and talks about everything you want to hear. It's such a fun show that always puts me in a good mood. Thanks, Ruffy. This is something that we're going to try to do more and more, so if you want to help support this show, you can do it in several different ways. One of those ways, I'll read your name on air right here, not just your name, but your whole review, by leaving a 5-star review, or any review, really. I'll read all of them. But hopefully you're kind enough to leave us a 5-star review on iTunes. Just go to our iTunes page, subscribe to the page, that way you don't miss an episode, and of course, leave that 5-star text review. iTunes Math does a lot of good things. that make more people listen to the show, and that means more cool things happen to Everything Is Awesome. Another way that you can support is word of mouth recommendations. Just tell friends to listen to Everything Is Awesome. Put it on when you're carpooling together on your way to work or on your way to Comic-Con or whatever. And the final way, this one may cost you a little bit of money, but that's okay. If you go to patreon.com/thatentertains, the other ways you help support us are just as good, free for nothing, help us. But this one, if you pledge some money to us, we'll give you some more stuff in return. You know, and by we I mean Jason Ashley from Too Cool for Tabletop and I, we like to say $12 a year, bro. $1 a month is really nothing to you. You skip anything for one day, and that's more than $1, and that helps make our dreams come true, really, if I'm going to be honest. That's entertainment, which is what funds this podcast, is running a patreon.com/thatentertains. And I mean, really, honestly, if we could hit $25 a month of support, that would be wonderful. It means bills are covered for us, and that's really all I want at the end of the day. And everything else is just icing on the cake. It means we get to do more upgrades, it means we get to create more content, and a lot of the stuff that we want to do is at least early access for you guys that pledge to us on patreon.com/thatentertains, or we'll even do some exclusive content. We're working on some things now that we're thinking of for exclusive content that we'll do randomly throughout the year and whatnot. So again, if you want to help support this podcast, go to patreon.com/thatentertains. Not just supporting this podcast, but you're supporting That's Entertainment, which means that even more content besides this podcast will come at you. We're talking skits, sketches, web series, movies, a whole ton of content that we have that we want to do that will eventually get done anyway, but with your help, we can get it done sooner. If you don't want to spend any cash, I completely get it. I understand it. iTunes reviews help us tremendously, as well as word of mouth recommendations. Finally, you can also go to the contact page on awesomepodcast.com and subscribe to our newsletter. We're going to start sending out weekly reminders of the things that we've posted throughout the week, as well as spotlights on the guests that we've had on our podcasts. And we're also going to be sending out reminders or notifications about new things that we're working on, events that we're going to be doing, and whatnot. So just another place to get some more detailed information. We're going to try to make it unique enough for you so that it's worth us invading your inbox. This has been more than a minute or two. So let's get back to the conversation with past Kev, past Mike, and ironically, future Chris O'Neill from Brotherwise Games.
You mentioned, your tabletop, designing it because of your love for that. When did you transition from video game to tabletop?
So very early on, I was starting to transition away from the more action-oriented, like first-person shooters and things like that. I think the last first-person shooter I played was Doom, and that was a while ago. And I sort of transitioned into more strategy games, so I was doing a lot of Civilization. I was doing more like wargaming, things like that on the computer. And then I think, just starting with Risk and with Axis and Allies, and that was sort of the start of my transition into being more tabletop. So I did play Magic. I didn't do a ton of it. I was doing sort of more, I don't know what the term is, kind of history, military games, things like that, more strategy games. And then I think things like Settlers of Catan came out, and Stone, and some of the more classic Euro games, and that's when I really got hooked on gaming, and really started spending a lot of time doing that. From there, I think I sort of learned to really enjoy all games. I mean, there are very few games that I can't enjoy and have fun doing. I'm not very good at a lot of games, but I stopped letting that keep me from having fun a long time ago.
Yeah, I'm the same way, because in in video games or tabletop games that aren't like RPG based, I tend to not be on the level of most. And first person shooters especially, like I enjoy playing it. I have a lot of fun playing, but I will have like maybe one kill for every 15 deaths.
Chris, I make Kev when he plays. He's almost like bait for me. And first person shooting, like those games, they were stuff that neither of us had played for probably like 10 years after they became popular, like post the Doom, Hexic, or Hexen or whatever it was, Wolfenstein era. Like once PlayStation 2 rolled around and like the third or fourth Call of Duty were around, and we were ignoring them. And then it kind of got to a saturation point, and that was when we got back into it, I think.
Yeah, I mean, my entry point was probably Doom, and then my the point where I left was GoldenEye, because we had a mutual friend, Mike and I, who was just too insanely good at it, and I just had to stop playing, or I would have killed him in real life.
Professional GoldenEye player. I remember that was just crazy how good some people got.
Yeah, nuts.
I tried my best, but yeah, even the sort of dexterity strategy, Warcraft.
Oh yeah, where you have to like min max everything and
how many clicks can you get in a minute? That was not where I found enjoyment, and I think that was sort of the natural transition over to tabletop, because for the most part, tabletop games are not rushed, right? I mean, there are some speed games, but this tabletop I found was a more relaxing environment. I enjoyed the social aspects of it. And, one of the things we say about, the best games are both enjoyable and challenging, whether you have a beer in your hand or not. We sort of have this, you should be able to, imbibe and socialize and do other things at the same time you're gaming. And still have fun. And that's part of our goal, to broaden the reach of Brotherwise Games beyond the standard, group of games. We want those more casual folks to be, to feel like they can sit at that table and not be the losers all the time. So we want to keep everybody at the table as long as we can, have as much fun.
Yeah, and I think you guys are doing a great job with that with Boss Monster, and I know you guys have some other things that's coming down the pipe. I saw on your site. So do you want to talk about like what's non-Boss Monster Brotherwise games that you may have coming out or that you're working on?
So we're really excited about this next game. It's called Unearth. That's UNEARTH. And this is a game, it's got another cool story behind it. We were, back when we first went to Gen Con, I think in, a couple of years ago, 2 or 3 years ago, Gen Con being the biggest tabletop gaming convention in the country, we were approached by a couple designers named Jason Horner and Matthew Ransom. And these guys were first-time designers, and they had designed a game which I think was called Dice Lords. And you sort of rolled dice and claimed territories, and the territories gave you abilities and things like that. And we found it really fun and charming, but it wasn't quite there for us. It wasn't really what we were looking for in a game yet. And so they came back the next year with a revision of the game. And we really enjoyed it. And at the time it was called Petals, and you were sort of a hive of bees, foraging for flowers. You would have a number of dice, a 4-sided die, a couple 6-sided dice, and an 8-sided die. And you would roll a die and designate a flower. And whoever had the highest die in any given flower, when its claim value was matched, would get that. And so we ended up actually buying it from these guys. And we worked very closely with them on it, and we've rethemed it a bit. So that the theme now is you're a little tribe of these guys called Delvers, and you're sort of searching for lost ruins and lost cities of your ancient medieval civilization, and trying to recover that and bring it back to life. So it's a dice placement game. I think it's going to do well. I'm really excited about it. The art is amazing. We got a guy named Jesse Riggle to do some isometric vector art for it. So For our Boss Monster fans who are, shocked that we're leaving the 16-bit art behind, we're sort of staying within the realm of video game type art, and it's just got a beautiful look to it.
When do you have an idea of when that'll be coming out?
It will. It'll be Gen Con is in August, and so folks who follow us on Facebook at Brotherwise Games or Boss Monster on Facebook, we'll see some teaser images for it. We're going to be rolling out more teaser images over the next month or two. It's off at the printers, so we're on schedule to launch at Gen Con, and we'll also be showing it off at Origin.
Very nice.
Yeah.
Now here's a question. This is more for me than for Kev, because when we discussed the whole point of the interview with you, part of it was because we were shamelessly trying to make our own. You guys were a huge inspiration for us, and we were kind of the same way. Like, we had always talked about making games and stuff like that, but it never really came to a point until we played your game, and then it was just, come on, Mike, we gotta make this. And I think we sat on several ideas for games for years. We were working together.
Years.
And finally, after like 3 years, something just kind of stuck. And we got to the point where, we played it without art. We had like little stick figures, and that was the extent of the art that we were putting together. And at this point, we're kind of at the point where we're beta test, or I guess pre-beta testing. It's all internal. We have people who are interested in it, and that is pretty much as far as we go, as far as how we know how to get involved. From my understanding, Johnny was working at Mattel, so he might have had some insight already. We are going in blind as hell. What would you say was like your plan for getting a manufacturer in check and distributors and things like that?
We had no plan. we were utterly shocked at our success. And so the first thing I tell new designers, new publishers who are using particularly crowdfunding to try and make their game happen is plan for success. Because we were really caught flat-footed. I think that we set our Kickstarter campaign for $12,000. And I remember the morning we launched, I remember, texting Johnny and saying, hey man, don't worry if we don't make this $12,000, for a couple of weeks. We've got it's a month-long campaign. Mom and dad can probably bail us out. And we made that $12,000 in the first day. And so it was pretty exciting. And part of what made it exciting, and not necessarily in a good way, is we were moving so fast on Kickstarter, and the game took off really for reasons we can't really tell you why it took off on Kickstarter. It just caught some nerve, or touched some nerve, I guess. But we were coming up with stretch goals like every night. Like, okay, what should our next stretch goal be? And we got to come up with some cards. What do we do? Like, what if we made item cards, that you attach to guys? Let's quickly come up with some item cards. And so we were really scrambling. And what we tell everybody who's going into do a Kickstarter now or an Indiegogo, whatever it's going to be, plan for success. The worst thing that happens is you don't get as far as you thought, and you can kind of hide the fact that you had all these stretch goals planned. But plan for that success. Do your research on printers. And at some point, as we're putting together the budget for the Kickstarter and figuring out what our minimum would be, we just emailed a couple of printing companies. Panda Game Manufacturing is one that does a lot of work with smaller publishers. And we said, here's our specs, can we get a quote? And we got some quotes for various amounts of units. I think, we asked for like 1,000 unit quote, and we asked for a 5,000 unit quote. I don't think we asked for a lot more than that. they're more than happy to give you a quote and to talk with you and to walk you through it. So there's really nothing to be lost by emailing one of these companies. They've learned that Kickstarter is a successful path for any new game designer, and we're always rooting for anybody on Kickstarter who's trying to make it happen. It's a tough environment. A lot more projects fail on Kickstarter than succeed, but it is really now it's a revolution in game publishing. Previously your chances of getting your game published were super low. You would have to go to one of the conventions and do basically what Jason and Matt did with us and Unearth, which is walk around and pitch your game and see if you can get some value or win some penalties. But now with Kickstarter, you got the reins. You're in control of this process, and people will take you seriously if you say. You email one of these companies and say, "Hey, we're launching a Kickstarter next month. Can we get a quote?" And it's really as simple as that. There's a couple of really great for everybody who's listening who wants to get into designing games. There's two great resources. One is Board Game Geek, and that's really the gamers hangout. But the true gamers, the hardcore gamers. These are the guys and gals who live, eat, and breathe gaming. And it's a good place to go and see what's been successful and why it's been successful. People will talk about that. And then there's also the BGDF, the Board Game Designers Forum. And that's a great place to go and ask questions. So there's people there who, they just talk about designing your game, getting artists for games, and what it takes to make the game happen. So both those resources are really useful and really should spend a lot of time there. And then lastly, we really encourage people to go to Stonemayer Games.
That's where I read your interview.
So these are the guys who make Side. The guy's name is Jamie Stegmeyer. And we've known Jamie for a while. He was sort of getting rolling at the same time we were. But he is 1,000 times smarter about it than we are. Jamie really has put a lot of thought into what makes crowdfunding work and how a small publishing house survives. And so he is, when people write us or ask us, do you have any advice? We're about to do this Kickstarter. That's the very first bit of advice I give. Get over to Stonemayer Games, read their entire section on Kickstarter, buy Jamie's book on Kickstarter, and that's your Bible as you're trying to make this happen. He's really done all the work for all of us, and we should support him in that.
Yeah, the interview that he did with you guys, it's actually in my bookmarks. It's like the third from the last one from the bottom. I'm showing Kev right now. I go back to that like every time. I'm like, all right, what did Boss Monster do? Jamie asked them. I'm gonna go back and just cite it over and over and over again for ideas. It's really, really funny that you bring that up.
That's very flattering, but he's moved way beyond that. He's got so much information there now that we find ourselves going back and looking at that stuff and saying, "Man, we should just pay Jamie to consult on this."
And he's done. Him and his partner have released a handful of games as well. I think they're up to like their fourth or fifth game. And I think they were using the same manufacturer as you. They were going to Panda Games. All his games you can see on Panda Games, so that's pretty cool.
Jamie is a hell of a designer in addition to being a great publisher. And his latest game, Side, is frankly the new hotness. It's an amazing game. I will not be surprised at all if it wins Origin's Game of the Year. So he's really got his act together. He's a great person to learn from. Anyone listening to this podcast who's interested in game design or publishing tabletop games needs to figure out what he's all about.
This is a question I'm just curious about because listening to you talk about Kickstarter and all what you went through, the advice you gave Mike and anyone else listening. Was there a point like before you launched your Kickstarter, maybe like when you began like seriously thinking about designing the game, where you guys were wondering, well, what are we going to do? Like, was crowdfunding like maybe so new that wasn't necessarily your option? Did you have other options?
Gosh, so we have other options. I don't think so. I mean, both Johnny and I had, at the time we published Boss Monster, had professional jobs. He was a brand manager in the toy industry, and I was a teaching consultant for higher education. And we both were making, decent money, and we both were pretty darn busy with our day jobs. So we didn't have a ton of time even to work on this. Boss Monster happened over the course of 3 years. It took us 3 years to develop Boss Monster. And that's keeping in mind, it started with an original idea that had been in place for a decade. So I think early on, as we were sort of talking about taking the plunge, we're both pretty sort of fiscally conservative guys and weren't made a decision early on, we're not going to self-fund this thing. We're not going to put our own money into it. Beyond, I think, the pixel art that we commissioned, pixel art had the double bonus of being very cheap to commission. It was art is by and large the biggest cost for most games. And pixel art was one way to really minimize those costs. So we probably talked about it, like getting a loan or going to mom and dad and asking for a loan. But ultimately, we decided if this fails on Kickstarter, that's a very good indicator that it would probably fail in other environments. And we're going to let it go if it doesn't succeed. So, that's one of the reasons I think we were so shocked that it succeeded, because we'd really talked ourselves into being okay with it if it failed. And that's another thing we tell people is, Kickstarter is great for the money. The money, there's no doubt that getting all that money to, sort of pre-sell the game and get it published is really amazing for new designers. But it's also really amazing publicity. That's one of the reasons you see already established companies going to Kickstarter to make their games. Because it's you can get, even if you only get 6,000 backers, you might get 50,000 views of the game. And that's a lot of free publicity. So we really did not consider any other avenue. And for most folks, we advise them do not self-fund, particularly in terms of commissioning art. I was talking with a guy the other day. He was designing an RPG, and he said, I've got this artist, and I can get all the art I need for about $5,000. And I said, whoa, time out there. That's a lot of money. And RPGs, really successful RPGs may make that much money over the course of a couple of years. So let's talk about ways to minimize your art budget. And one of the ways to do that is with Kickstarter, the sort of the watchword is fake it till you make it. So the people who are viewing your Kickstarter page or looking at what you're producing, they don't need to know that you haven't done all the art for the game. They don't need to see all the art for the game. They just have to see enough art to make them think you've got everything done. And so we tell people, we talked with them about how much of this art do you really need to show people on Kickstarter. This is $5,000 for 30 images or something like that. How much would it cost to commission just 5 images? So that's another thing we tell people, that if you're going to do a Kickstarter, remember, you don't have to have the game completed in terms of packaged and printed and art and ready to go, but you do have to make it look like it's complete. People on Kickstarter really want to fund things that are fully developed. That's not the spirit of Kickstarter. It's not the way it got started, but it's really what it's become. They want to get in on a game that's ready to go and it's going to be successful, and so you've got to show them that it's ready to go, and while at the same time knowing you still got a fair bit of time.
Yeah, I like that mindset of preparing for success, but like be ready for, I don't want to say failure but failure for more or less, because Kickstarter is such a hit or miss world. If you don't catch straight away, you may not catch it at all during your 30-day or 60-day campaign.
It is. It's tough. Boy, I cannot remember the stats, but recently somebody put up the stats on the number of board games that launch on Kickstarter every month. It's a lot. And video games is also a lot. But I think you've got to sort of go into it realistically, realizing that it's a very crowded market. Board games in general, even outside of Kickstarter, have become an incredibly crowded market. The sort of what's the word I'm looking for? The risk versus reward of Kickstarter is still there, though. I mean, because your other options for getting things published are pretty limited. I mean, like I said, it's either Kickstarter or it's do the rounds at the cons and try to find someone to put your game in front of. And that's a really daunting thing. So I think for anybody who's really serious about this, Kickstarter or Indigo, whatever crowdfunding it is, it has to be your first choice. It really does. And that means sort of figuring out how to make that work.
So you had mentioned that you were kind of blown away by the support on Kickstarter. I was kind of under the impression that you went into it already kind of having a following. Did you really develop the following, through Kickstarter, where you kind of got the play testers who were doing the print and play and those kinds of things?
Oh yeah. Well, I mean, we had done a lot of playtesting of the game, but that playtesting group was still relatively small, and the number of people who had actually seen and played Boss Monster was certainly below 50 at that point. We had shown it around at a couple conventions and just tried to get the word out, but no, we did not go into the Kickstarter with any sort of following. And the way it took off on Kickstarter, that's when the community really came together. And we were both impressed and grateful and also daunted by that community because they really took ownership of the game. We would get emails from guys every day during that Kickstarter saying, "Hey man, when's the next stretch goal coming out? We're moving pretty fast towards this one and we want new cards." And so we were like scrambling to keep those people happy. But that's what Kickstarter does. I mean, the people who regularly haunt Kickstarter, sort of Kickstarter junkies, they really love that high of making a game happen, of making a project happen, and they take ownership of it, and they feel like they're entitled to a fair bit of return for that. And I think they are entitled to a fair bit of return. We always, we think of our backers as co-owners of the game. They made it happen, and we do feel obligated to them, and grateful to what they were able to do for us.
I'm looking at Mike because I know he has a sheet of questions here. So.
I'm pretty sure we hit all these marks. I mean, the only other things that that we might want to ask are the things like obviously you guys are a huge inspiration for us. Was there a specific couple of people who inspired you? But it actually sounds like it was just like ideas floating around in your head.
Yeah, I don't know that we were trying to. I had never even looked at Kickstarter before going on there and doing some research on successful games versus unsuccessful games, which is another bit of homework we recommend everybody do. And if there was anybody we were attempting to emulate, it would be the designers we admired and the games that play. But Boss Monster was such a unique and different game. I think when it came out, it's not like we were emulating any one particular designer. It was just a desire to be part of that community. We wanted to see if we could do this thing. And this sounds very empty and cliche, but man, if we were able to do it, anybody can do it because it is. we went in totally unprepared and uninformed.
You gave me so much hope, Chris.
And so we tell people, go in positive, plan for success, make this happen, and you've got as good a chance as anybody else on that side of making this dream of yours happen. And for the most part, the community of gamers is very supportive and will sort of rally behind you. So we regularly will get feedback to guys who are putting up projects on Kickstarter, and they'll send us a link to their page and say, hey, what do you guys think of this? Can you give us any feedback? And if we have time, we try to give them feedback because we really do want them to succeed. Like I said, the great thing about tabletop is there's always place for one more at the table. And we really want the more games there are out there, in some ways, the better. It's just more fun, useful.
Yeah, well, totally. I mean, the more good tabletop gaming that's out there, the more the tabletop community is going to grow, and that just helps the community. It helps the business side of it. It just everyone wins when there's more good content out there.
Yeah, and there are just some amazing games out there right now. For anybody who's listening to this, if you haven't played a tabletop game in a while, find a game store in your area or a game cafe and check it out. There's just some really fun games out.
Yeah, I mean, I love going to a drive-through RPG to discover new tabletop games, and actually turning to podcasting. If you find good tabletop podcasters out there, whether it's RPG or not, you can discover, that's a great way to discover all these new games that are coming out, or even maybe classic games that you've never heard of, just to kind of hop on board. And it's a great way to bond. I can't wait till my kids are a little bit older so that I can play games like Boss Monster or Settlers of Catan, with them, because I feel like it's going to be such a fun bonding moment with my family.
It is. It's very cool. Raising young gamers is really cool. You never have that excuse that you don't have someone to play with anymore.
Yeah, I think that's one of the coolest things is as you get older, you lose your friends, tend to move away. Me and Mike are lucky enough that we live 5 minutes from each other for the last 30 years. But not everyone has that. So it is your family is your first connection before anyone else as you grow older. So totally to find ways to bond so they don't become little shitheads is what you need to do.
Yeah, gaming is a great education.
Yeah. I think it would be remiss for me to not ask this question because obviously, Brotherwise is moving away from Boss Monster to do on Earth. Do you have plans to go back to Boss Monster and revisit that with any kind of new expansion or sequel or anything?
Absolutely. We'll be launching a new expansion in June. It's a new, it's called Implements of Destruction. And it is a Tools of Hero Kind sequel. So it's item cards. And it's for anybody who finds that, the heroes have gotten a little too easy in Boss Monster for them. The item cards, heroes pick them up as they come into town. There's magical weapons and magical items. And it changes the game considerably. So it makes the game a lot tougher. It makes those heroes into a real bona fide threat. And then if you kill a hero who's carrying an item, you get to keep that item yourself and use it.
Oh, that's really cool. I like
fun cross-table stuff. I really like playing with the items. I think it's a very different game, very fun game. So that will be out in June. It's a mini expansion. Comes in a little mini NES box, like Tools of Hero Kind and Crash Landing. And in general, our goal is to come out with a new expansion every year. So we will definitely be reinvesting back into Boss Monster and doing whatever we can to keep it fresh for our players as long as we can.
Excellent.
Very cool. That's exciting to hear as a Boss Monster fan. Chris, before we end the show, before we let you go, do you want to give out a couple plugs where people can find you?
Yeah, so we're on brotherwisegames.com on the web. We're starting, that's largely a Boss Monster site, as you might expect. But we're starting to transition it over into more of a publisher identity where you can find all our games, including the upcoming on Earth. And, of course, you can find us on Facebook by just searching for Boss Monster Game. And we're on Twitter at hashtag Boss Monster Game. And in general, we're always happy to talk to new designers. So we have a game submission process, and if anyone's interested in submitting a game for review, they can email us at DWISEGAMES@gmail.com, and we'll send you to the submission.
Very cool. I think it's super cool. We'll end on this note. I think it's super cool that you, with all the success you guys have found with Boss Monster and Brotherwise Games, that you are easily, willingly to work with more indie developers and let them come up as well. I think that's because not everyone does that. When people find success, sometimes they forget, and I think that's super cool that you guys have not forgotten.
Well, it's sort of selfish as well. There's a lot of really good ideas out there that people have, and I think Unearth is a great example of that. It was a game that we just weren't going to come up with on our own, and so we wanted to find a partner who would do that for us. So, thanks so much, guys. I really enjoyed the opportunity to talk with you.
All right, thank you, everyone. That was Chris from Brotherwise Games. We'll be back next week with another great interview. Don't know who yet. Make sure you follow Mike on Twitter at Tellest. You can find out more about his book series and eventually his card game that he's working on. You can find me on Twitter at ThatNerdyKev. And, of course, you can find this show on Twitter at RealAwesomePod. For Everything is Awesome, I am your host, Kev. We've been awesome.
Everything is Awesome is part of Courts and Parts, a podcast network featuring pop culture, TV, movie, and geek podcasts. Check out some of our other shows, like TV Ate My Brain, Let's Chat with Revelin Friends, and Podstalgic at courtsandparts.com.